Bibles this morning to the book of Psalms, chapter 3. I've been reading the book of Psalms in my devotions in the mornings, and I begin noticing several things. I think I'm over to, I believe I'm at chapter 35, 40, somewhere around there. And I begin noticing a theme that popped up in many of the various Psalms. So then I went back and reread some of them, highlighted some of them, and as I began thinking, I thought, if I've never seen that, there's a good chance someone else may not have seen that either. And if you have seen it or heard it, then pretend like you haven't and enjoy it anyway. Psalms chapter 3, it starts out a Psalm of David, so we know who wrote it, when he fled from Absalom, his son. I'm not going to give you the history lesson, but I hope you remember when Absalom rebelled against his father, literally kicked his father off of the throne, marched in, took control of Jerusalem, forcing his dad to flee Jerusalem, flee Judea, flee the country, and literally run for his life. So that's the background. Then it says, Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Referencing his own son and the army that his son had gathered behind him. Many are they that rise up against me. Most of Israel at that time had risen up against him. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. Selah. That word means stop, pause, think about what you just read. Anytime you see the word Selah, it means stop, go back, reread the verse that's in, and think about it. Many there be which say of my soul, not my body, my soul, my innermost being, there is no help for him in God. I'll touch part of that later. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of my head. Not hanging, not lifting it up in that sense, but the tendency is to go around with your head hung low, and God comes along and lifts our head up and gets us to see what's out there. There's a song, and I can't think of the name of it, and I couldn't find it because I couldn't think of the name of it. But it's something goes like this. You can't see the sun with your head to the ground. How many of you know what that song is? Nobody. Maybe if I sung it, no, I won't do that to you. But he said, when everybody is saying there's no hope for my innermost being, the Lord comes along and lifts up my head so that I'm not always looking at the ground. Have you ever known people that were so negative, just negative? I've often said, of course I grew up down south, I said if you shot them with a 24 karat bullet, they still would complain. You could give them $1 million and they would still complain. God is the one, and I'll definitely spend more time on this. God is the one that lifts up our head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. Selah. Think about it. I laid me down and slept. I awakened, for the Lord sustained me. Put that beside your bed. I laid me down and slept because I knew God's in control. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. And then he makes the proclamation that we used for the title. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. Father, we come again this morning. And I pray, Father, that more than anything else, that you will be exalted, that you will be honored, whether it's through me or through someone else that's here, that we might look to you, we might point others to you. Father, help us to learn to lean on thee when times get tough. In Jesus' name, amen. One of the great doctrines that we believe and have believed, and I hope always believe, is that God is absolutely sovereign in all things. I think most of us believe that, at least in our head. May not believe it anywhere else, but we believe it in our head. He is not beholden to any individual, any group, any nation, or any other created thing. God is not beholden to me. God owes me nothing. God owes you nothing. God is not obligated to do anything with, for, to, or through you. Now, I know it's true that he chose Israel as his chosen nation, but that was because he chose them. Israel didn't deserve it any more than any other nation. In fact, we're told that Abraham lived in a land of idolatry over in Ur, and that more than likely Abraham actually worshiped idolatry, and yet God chose him, God called him because it pleased him. While we believe that God is sovereign on earth, in the universe, in heaven, we often don't think about God being sovereign in our everyday life. And I'm going to be spending most of the message on that aspect. When we think about our text, salvation belongeth unto the Lord, many people, maybe even most people, would say that that's talking about salvation. And that'll be our final point. But I believe there are other ways that salvation belongs unto the Lord. And I want to look at some of those ways and hopefully encourage you that when things get bad, God is still on the throne. I get asked real frequently, several times a week usually, how are you doing? And I used to think they really wanted to know. I found out they really don't want to know all of my aches and pains. So I started telling them, I'm fine. for the shape I'm in. And most of them are satisfied with that. How are you doing? You got an hour and a half for me to tell you everything? No, I'm fine. I'm fine for the shape that I'm in. But then the other thing that I have recently started saying, how are you doing? I know you firemen the other day. They were the ones that rescued me when I fell off of the ladder. They were the ones that picked me up, put me on the stretcher, put me in the ambulance, carried me to UC, took me in, checked me in. So they knew very much of my situation. They said, how are you doing? And I said, as long as God's on the throne, I'm fine. Now you may have to think about that one for a second. As long as God's in charge, I am right where God wants me. I am physically where God has placed me. I'm fine because this is the work of God. I'm fine. I'm right where God wanted me, right where God put me. So I want to look this morning at a few ways other than salvation, which will be our last point. I want to look at some ways that in everyday life, salvation is of the Lord. Now, we read in our text, and in my first point, by the way, is salvation is of the Lord in times of distress. Our text said that they are increased that trouble me. I mentioned his son rebelled, his son overthrew him, his best friend, Ahithophel, his best friend turned against him, joined his son Absalom, and led the rebellion. And everywhere David turned, he was getting word that so-and-so has turned against you. So-and-so has sided with Absalom. The nation, the people have sided with Absalom. And everywhere he turned, he was getting bombarded with this one has followed, this one has followed, this one has all followed Absalom. They are increased that trouble me. Many are risen up against me. They tried to discourage him by saying, not even God can help you now. Not even God can rescue you now. You're doomed, David. Absalom is going to kill you. But David understood. David knew. Salvation is of the Lord. And he said in verse 3, O Lord, but thou, O Lord, art a shield for me. When the enemy is attacking, God is the shield that takes the brunt of the arrows and the spears. God is the brunt who shelters us and shields us from all that could go wrong. Have you ever tried to think of everything that could go wrong in a situation? You're the exception. Well, if I do this, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? What if something else goes wrong? You know who protects me from, and I like what, I believe it was you, God knows an infinite number of possibilities. He knows everything that could possibly go wrong, and he shields us from it. He's our shield. He is my glory. He's the one that lifts my head up when I get down. He's the one that lifts me up when I'm ready to throw in the towel. He's the one on one occasion, David's own men, his own soldiers, threatened to kill him. David had fled to the Philistines. The king had given them the city. They lived in the city. They left. And when they came back, the Edomites had burned the city to the ground, taken all of their wives and children captives, and David's own soldiers were ready to kill him. David said, God's the one that lifts up my head, even when everybody turns against me. I'll not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Oh, you're outnumbered. That's all right. God's a majority against anybody. Remember when the army had encamped against the children of Israel? 185,000 soldiers had encamped against Israel. And I love the way the King James translated it. The next morning when they woke up, they were all dead. I love that phrase. I know what it means, but I love the phrase that, you know what, 185,000, and they went to sleep that night, and God said, oh, you think you're going to capture Jerusalem, huh? Boom. 185,000 of you are dead. God saved the nation of Israel. Salvation was of God. And David goes on, and Lord, you took care of the enemy, and I know you'll do it again. Does that mean we don't fight? No. David became famous for having slain his 10,000s. David was a mighty warrior. He had 36 men under him who were the greatest of the greatest. And he fought, and he fought. He was a fighter. But he also understood that it's God that saves me in battle. Should we become pacifist? By the way, I looked that word up. It simply means one who is anti-war to the point they refuse to fight. They accept abuse, even murder. You can kill my wife, kill my children, kill my parents, kill everybody, and I will not resist you. Well, good luck to them, but and I admire their whatever it is, but that's not what God intended. We fight when necessary, but we understand it's God that gives the victory. 2 Samuel chapter 22, the David wrote again, in my distress. You ever been distressed? The weight of work, the weight of finances. I was reading yesterday, and I hope this doesn't affect any of you all. If you do, you've kept it a really good secret. Publishers Clearinghouse filed for bankruptcy. In the article, it said people, several of them they interviewed, had been guaranteed $5,000 a week for as long as they lived. They aren't going to get that $5,000 a week. And some of them were complaining, oh, I don't know what we're going to do. I'm going to have to get a job. I'm going to have to go back to work. We're going to lose our house. And they were distressed. What are we going to do? We don't have that $5,000 a week coming in now. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. Now, I am 100% in favor, if at all possible, you lay aside your tithe first and foremost, and then you lay aside and put some in savings for the rainy day. But in distress, the bank isn't going to be the one to help you. I remember once in college, we were married, and we got in some hard times, and I went to my boss, and I said, "Boss, I need a raise." Well, why? Well, and this and this. And it's like, that's not my problem. That's your problem. You shouldn't have bought that. You shouldn't have done that. Whatever it was. We go to the bank. We try to get a second mortgage. We try to get a home equity loan. We try to charge our credit cards. I read last week that the national credit card debt is like $8 billion. People have put on credit cards. Well, they have a spending problem many times. But in my distress, what is it that's causing stress in your life? David said, I called unto the Lord and cried to my God, and he did hear my voice. Psalm 6, I am weary with my groaning. All the night make I my bed to swim with tears. He had cried so much that his bed was soaked with tears. I watered my couch with my tears. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. It waxeth old because of all mine enemies. What did David do? Salvation is of the Lord. If I'm going to get out of this situation, it's going to be the Lord that gets me out. It's going to be God that rescues me. Psalm 6, just a few chapters over, David wrote, I am weary with my groaning. All the night I make that's the verse I just read. I can't sleep at night because of circumstances. Now, I'm not going to ask you how many of you have trouble sleeping. I know at least one who could fall asleep. Good morning, Howard. They can go out literally in the middle of a sentence. Some of us don't have that ability. If something is going on, problems with a member, problems with church, problem with finances, problem with whatever, I lay there and I think about it and I think about it and I think about it. And the more I think, the less I sleep. David was kind of like that, only he finally said, I called unto the Lord. Someone once said, instead of counting sheep, try talking to the shepherd. I like that. What time I am afraid, I will call on the Lord. Psalm 17, show me thy marvelous loving kindness, O thou that savest by thy right hand. them which put their trust in thee from those that rise up against them. Lord, I can't save myself in this situation. I don't have all the answers. Lord, show thy marvelous loving kindness. Psalms 18, he delivered me from my strong enemy and from them which hated me, for they were too strong for me. They prevented me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my stay. He brought me forth also into a large place. He delivered me, verse 17, 18, 19. He delighted in me. David found strength. God delivered him from his strong enemy. Psalm 18:47. It is God that avengeth me and subdueth the people under me. He delivereth me from mine enemies. Yea, thou liftest me up above those that rise up against me. Thou hast delivered me from the violent man. Psalms chapter 4. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me to dwell safely. What if somebody breaks in while I'm sleeping? Well, I've said this enough that everybody knows it. It's hardly a secret. I keep a .357 Magnum right by my bed, and I will protect my family. But I also know that sometimes I have slept when thunder and lightning and all kinds of things. I will lay me down in peace and sleep, for it's God that ultimately keeps me safe. Like I said, God puts we do have human responsibility, but understand it's God that ultimately keeps us. Psalm 23, very familiar. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I preached this many times. This is not death. This is a valley where everywhere you look, there is the threat of death. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Salvation is of the Lord in times of distress. Number 2, salvation is of the Lord in times of sickness. One of the most familiar stories of this is found in the book of Job. In Job chapter 1, the sons of God came together. Satan came in the midst of them. And God said, "Where have you been, Satan?" And Satan said, "I've gone to and fro, hither and thither, upon the face of the earth." And God said, "I've got a man down here that is such a devout Christian. Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan said, "I can't touch him because you have built a hedge around him, and I can't touch him." Now, I find that comforting. Satan cannot touch me without God's permission. God, I'd love to touch Job. I would love to get a hold of Job, but I can't because you have built a hedge around him. I can't touch him without your permission. God said, okay, I will open the hedge. You can touch everything he owns. You can touch his body and make him sick as a dog. But you cannot kill him. Now, I've said this. Some of you hopefully remember it. Satan could not kill Job, but he could make him think he was dying. Talked to a lady just a couple of weeks ago, young lady, and I've known her for a while, and I saw her, and I said, how's everything going? And she said, I was just diagnosed with breast cancer. And I said, what? You're too young. But you know what? And it's like, whenever we hear that word cancer, we immediately think the worst, don't we? What would you think if the doctor calls tomorrow and said, we got your test results back and you have stage 4 cancer? Now, we all know cancer can kill. We also know that they have made tremendous progress in curing cancer. But death is a viable threat to us. David is everywhere he looks. There's the shadow of possible death, and over here is the possibility of death, and over there is the possibility of death. And everywhere he looks in the shadows, there's the possibility of death. David said, I won't be afraid, because whatever happens, God is with me. Some of the firemen that I've known for years, some of them have been here. We've done the firemen for 14 years. Some of them have been here for 14 years, every September. And they were asking me a lot of questions, and I said, they told me that I would probably be paralyzed. They told me there was a chance I would die. They told me all of these things. And I said, you know what? I told one of them, I said, I love it. I love it. I love it when God makes liars out of doctors. But you know what? David said that the threat of death is everywhere. There's shadows of death everywhere. But I will not be afraid, because thou art with me. Satan said God had a hedge around him that prevented Satan from getting in. But I want to show you how Satan knew what God had done. Satan had it right. But in Job chapter 3, listen at how Job described that same hedge. Satan said God had put a hedge to protect you. Job chapter 3, Job said, why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? Satan said that hedge is there to protect Job. Job said that hedge is there to prevent me from getting out. Satan understood the hedge was to protect Job. Job thought that hedge was there to hinder him, to keep him hedged in, to keep him trapped. Isn't it amazing how we look at things versus how God looks at things? Number 3, salvation's of the Lord in distress. Salvation is of the Lord in sickness. Salvation is of the Lord in prejudice. Now, how many of you know where I'm going with that one? Yeah, you know, I phrased it differently. In the book of Jonah, we find a man who, in Jonah, we find out that God called him to preach. God said, I want you to go to Nineveh and I want you to preach. Now, there's actually another reference to Jonah in 2 Kings. In 2 Kings chapter 14 and verse 25, we find out that Jonah was a well-established prophet of God. He was a well-known prophet who had preached, who had prophesied, and he was well known as not just a prophet, but in that same verse, he's called the servant of God. Jonah was an outstanding servant of God, but he was also very prejudiced. So when we get to the book of Jonah, he's already a prophet. We get to the book, and God says, I want you to go preach to the Ninevites. Now, if you don't know anything about the Ninevites, I'm going to give you the 30-second version. The Ninevites had already been said by God that they would come and destroy Israel. God had already said the Ninevites are going to destroy Israel. They were evil, wicked, immoral, cruel people. In fact, the Ninevites were most famous for some of the worst torture known to mankind. I won't describe it because I did one time and a lady almost threw up. She got so sick, she almost threw up. So if you want to know, I'll tell you later. But I'll just say that they invented some of the worst torture that mankind could think of. God wants Jonah to go preach to the most wicked, immoral, cruel, torturous people that were going to come back and destroy Israel. God said, I want you to go preach to those people. Jonah was very prejudiced. Very prejudiced. Lord, I don't want to save those people. I want those people to be destroyed. I want those people killed. I want them killed so that they can't come down later and destroy Israel. Lord, I don't want to preach to them because I don't want them to be saved. They don't deserve to be saved. Keep that thought in mind because I'm going to come back to you in a minute. Lord, they're so bad. They're so evil. They're so full of torture. I don't want them saved. They don't deserve it. Jonah thought that he had the right to pick and choose whom God could save. chapter 2, we find his experience of being swallowed by a whale. And I'm not going to read it, but you can read it. It was not a picnic inside the belly of the whale. If you read it carefully, he almost described it as being in hell. And after 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah finally concluded, and he finally cried out, "Salvation belongeth to the Lord." Are we really that much different from Jonah? Are there people that you think are less worthy of being saved than others? Why, I've never been drunk. I've never robbed a bank. I've never killed anyone. I've never committed adultery. I've never done this. I've never done that. I can understand why God would want to save me. But that person, they're a drunkard, they're a whoremonger, they're thieves, they're liars, they're the worst of people. They don't deserve to be saved. My grandmother, on my dad's side, was always a very moral person. She was always a good lady, a good person. She got cancer. She was in the hospital. Brother Wilson went to visit her, and he simply witnessed to her, explained salvation, and God miraculously saved her there in the hospital room. 1 week later, she died of a heart attack. Well, how come God saved her on her deathbed? Salvation belongs to God. It's none of your business. God chose to save grandmother on her literally deathbed 1 week later. Dad got the call from the hospital. Your mom just passed. Did she deserve? She was in her 60s. Old. Really old. At least when you're this young, 60s are really old. She lived her whole life, a good person, but lost as could be. And God saved her 1 week to the day before she died. Others, they die without Christ. They die lost. They die and spend eternity in hell. Who gets to decide who God saves? If it was up to me, I was talking to someone recently, and I knew their pastor as a kid. In fact, I was his pastor as a kid. He was one of the meanest, low-downest, good-for-nothingest kids you could ever, yeah. In fact, I told people when God saved him and called him to preach, he was the last person on the face of the earth that I ever thought deserved to be saved, and I never dreamed God would call him to preach. Now he's pastor of a church that we would fellowship with, except they're about 120, 130 miles away. I've preached for him. He's preached for me. Great man, man of God. Believe me, he drove me crazy, drove his parents crazy. If I had been picking who is most likely to be saved, he would not have been on my list. But you know what? Salvation doesn't belong to me. I don't get to pick and choose. Oh, let's see, you're a nice lady most of the time. I think I'll save you. No, salvation belongs to the Lord. I close with the final point. What about us? Have you ever had stress in your life? I think every one of us have. It may be in the form of sickness. It may be in the form of the loss of a loved one. I was reading an article by Mrs. Kirk this week. Those of you that don't know, her husband was the one that was shot and killed. Left a wife, I think he was 31 if I remember. Left a wife and 2 small children. And I was reading an article from his wife, and she said the ones that killed him, and I'm paraphrasing, they thought they could shut him up. But they have no idea the fire they started that is going to burn all across America. She's a grieving widow with 2 small kids. But she said, you know what? We're going to carry on the fight that my husband started because God's in control. And we're depending on God, and we're going forward by the help of God. Maybe in sickness. It may be the loss of a family or friend. And I don't mean from death. It may be from many sources. Sometimes we may even feel that it's God that's stifling us by keeping us hedged in. But God's not stifling us. He's simply keeping us from harm and danger. Understand, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, salvation is of the Lord. I go to a lot of doctors, and I've told most of them, I appreciate what you do, but ultimately salvation is of the Lord. That's physical and any other way. Where are you? Are you still worrying and fretting over everything? Or have you learned like David? I called upon the Lord. He saved me. Not spiritually. David was already saved. But he saved him from death